small Canadian town, tucked between mountains and mist, the kind of place where you leave your door unlocked, where the biggest crime last week was old Mrs. Jenkins' pumpkin patch getting trampled by deer. Now hold that image, because on February 25th, 2007, at 9:23 p.m., a single gunshot cracked through Mission, BC like a thunderclap, and when the smoke cleared, a 28-year-old man named Timothy Vernon Jones was slumped behind the wheel of his car, bleeding out under a flickering streetlight. No struggle, no witnesses, no reason, just a life erased in seconds. But here's what keeps detectives awake at night. Timothy wasn't just killed that evening. His entire story, his quirks, his inside jokes, the way he laughed at bad action movies, got reduced to 4 cold words in a police report. Innocent victim of circumstance. Until today, because this isn't a story about a murder. It's about how a man became a ghost in his own hometown, how a community's trust dissolved overnight, and how, 17 years later, we still don't know the answer to the simplest question. Why Timothy? Was he in the wrong place at the wrong time? Or did someone see his face in that driver's seat and pull the trigger with purpose? The truth is buried somewhere between the rumors, the dead ends, and a family's refusal to let the world forget the real Timothy. And by the end of this, you'll realize the most unsettling part isn't the mystery. It's that whoever did this, they're still out there. Mission, British Columbia. Let's talk about what this town is. It's the kind of place where the local diner still serves pie a la mode for $3.50, where the high school football coach has held the same job since 1989, where you can't walk down First Avenue without someone rolling down their truck window to ask, "Need a ride?" It's a town where crime stats are measured in stolen bicycles and the occasional drunken fistfight outside the Legion. In 2006, the RCMP's biggest headache was a rogue ATV tearing up hiking trails. That's the Mission people knew, the Mission they trusted. But February 25th, 2007, that's the Mission that keeps parents double-checking door locks decades later. Because when Timothy Vernon Jones, a construction worker with a weakness for Schwarzenegger movies and a habit of forgetting to refill the office coffee pot, was gunned down on Horn Street, it wasn't just a murder. It was a breach of the unwritten contract this town had with itself. Bad things don't happen here. Let's be clear, Timothy wasn't some shadowy figure. His co-workers still laugh about the time he showed up to a job site wearing 2 different work boots. His mom still has his childhood hockey trophies dusted on the mantle. He was the guy who'd help you move a couch on his day off, then refused to take anything but a 6-pack of Budweiser as payment. Exactly the kind of person you'd never peg as a target. And that's the problem. Because if Timothy wasn't involved in anything sinister, no gang ties, no secret debts, no midnight meetups, then his murder isn't just a crime. It's a riddle, one that forces us to ask, was this a message gone wrong? A bullet meant for someone else? Or proof that evil doesn't need a reason? Here's what we know. That night, Mission stopped being that sleepy town near Abbotsford. The streets didn't change. The mountains didn't move. But the air, it got heavier. Because now, every time a car backfires or a firework pops on Canada Day, someone in Mission catches their breath and wonders if the nightmare's coming back. Sunday nights in Mission have a rhythm. The weekend's chaos fades. TVs glow behind curtains. Driveways empty. By 9 p.m., the only things moving are the occasional raccoon rummaging through trash cans and the fog rolling in off the Fraser River. February 25th was no different. Until it was. Timothy left his apartment around 8:30 that evening. Maybe he was heading to the 7-Eleven for a Slurpee, his usual vice after a week of hauling drywall. Maybe he was just circling the block, trying to shake off one of those restless moods that follow you like a shadow. We'll never know. What we do know is this. At approximately 9:28 p.m., Timothy's dark-colored sedan sat idling at the corner of Horn Street and Cedar Avenue, a quiet intersection, flanked by maple trees and a dented stop sign. The kind of spot you'd only notice if you missed your turn. Then a single gunshot, not the pop of a backfiring engine, not fireworks. A .40 caliber bullet tore through the driver's side window. No car screeching away, no footsteps pounding pavement, just the echo fading into the damp air. When the first witness arrived, a night shift nurse driving home, she saw Timothy slumped forward, his hands still gripping the wheel. The streetlight above him flickered, casting jagged shadows across his face. Paramedics would later say he died within minutes. No last words. No dramatic final act. Just a 28-year-old man, alone in a car that still smelled like the pine air freshener he'd bought the week before. But here's what investigators couldn't reconcile. That bullet came from distance. Not a car-to-car execution. Not a heated argument turned deadly. Someone stood in the darkness. A parking lot? A sidewalk? Aimed. And fired. Cold. Precise. Almost impersonal. Was Timothy making eye contact with the shooter when it happened? Did he even see them coming? Or was he adjusting the radio? Humming along to some forgotten rock song? Oblivious until the glass exploded? The questions pile up. The answers don't. Because in a town where everyone knows everyone, nobody saw a thing. No dash cams. No porch light security footage. Just a ghost of a crime scene. And a family left to stitch together a nightmare out of maybes and what-ifs. When the police arrived that night, they didn't find a crime scene. They found a ghost story. No shell casing. No fingerprints. No shattered glass from a struggle. Just Timothy's car, idling in the middle of the road. His body slumped over the wheel like he'd decided to take a nap. The only evidence that something violent had happened? A single bullet hole in the driver's side window, and a town's innocence, shattered into a million unanswered questions. The first 48 hours were a blur of dead ends. Detectives knocked on every door within a half-mile radius. They asked the same questions over and over. Did you hear anything? See anyone running? Notice a strange car? The answers were all the same. No, no, no. Mission wasn't just a small town, it was a town that trusted. People didn't spy on their neighbors. They didn't assume the worst. And that trust, it became the killer's greatest ally. Timothy's life was picked apart like a jigsaw puzzle missing half its pieces. His co-workers were interviewed, his friends polygraphed, his internet history scoured for secret grudges, gambling debts, anything that might hint at a motive. But Timothy was exactly who he seemed, a guy who built houses by day, played NHL 07 by night, and called his mom every Sunday without fail. No enemies, no drama, no double life, just normal. And in a murder investigation, normal is the worst kind of dead end. Forensics offered no comfort. The bullet that killed Timothy was a .40 caliber, common enough to match half the handguns in Canada. But without the weapon, it was useless. The trajectory told a chilling story. The shooter hadn't been inside the car. They hadn't even been close. They'd fired from a distance, through the open window, like a hunter taking down a deer. But why? If this was a hit, why not make sure? If it was random, why choose Timothy? The questions outnumbered the facts 10-1. Rumors filled the void. Some whispered it was a gang initiation, a new member ordered to shoot the first person they saw. Others swore Timothy had witnessed something he shouldn't have. A drug deal, an affair, a secret buried deep enough to kill for. But the RCMP found nothing. No gang ties, no shady characters in his texts, no cryptic warnings. Just a construction worker who loved his job, his Xbox, and his mom's homemade lasagna. The lack of evidence became its own kind of evidence. Without a motive, detectives circled 3 theories. 1, Timothy was a random target, a casualty of someone else's rage or madness. 2, it was a case of mistaken identity. Maybe the shooter thought he was someone else. Maybe they'd gotten the wrong car, the wrong street, the wrong life. Or 3, the darkest possibility, that this wasn't a crime of passion or greed, but of pure, unscripted evil. A predator testing their power. A monster who wanted to see if they could get away with it. The family pushed for answers. They printed flyers, appeared on local news, begged for anyone with information to come forward. A few tips trickled in. A suspicious truck parked near the river that night. A loud argument overheard weeks earlier. A man in a dark hoodie seen walking alone. But every lead dissolved like smoke. The truck belonged to a farmer checking on his cattle. The argument was about a hockey bet. The hoodie, a teenager sneaking out to meet his girlfriend. Months turned into years. The case went cold, not because the police gave up, but because the truth had no trail to follow. How do you solve a murder when the victim has no secrets? When the killer leaves no trace? When the town itself seems to swallow the crime whole? The detectives still remember Timothy's file number. They still get calls from his mother every December. Her voice steady but brittle, asking if there's news. There never is. Today, the case sits in a storage room in Mission. crammed between boxes of paperwork and forgotten evidence. No DNA to test. No witnesses left to question. Just a bullet hole preserved in a window pane and a family's refusal to let the world move on. Because here's the thing about wrong place, wrong time. It doesn't just steal a life. It steals the logic we cling to. The belief that if we live right, work hard, and mind our own business, we'll be safe. Timothy did all those things, and it didn't matter. So where does that leave us? With a file full of maybes, a town that still glances over its shoulder, and a question that haunts anyone who hears this story. If it could happen to Timothy, a man with no enemies, no secrets, no reason to die, what's stopping it from happening to you? In the days after Timothy's death, the newspapers called him an innocent victim. For words. Neat. Simple. But here's the problem. Timothy wasn't a character in a crime drama. He wasn't a symbol. He was a person. And reducing him to a headline does more than oversimplify his life. It erases it. So let's fix that. Timothy Vernon Jones was born in Mission on a rainy April morning in 1979. His mom still remembers the way he'd hum in his sleep as a baby, like he was practicing a song only he could hear. He grew up stubborn, the kind of kid who'd fall off his bike, scrape his knees raw, and climb right back on. At 16, he rebuilt a rusted-out Ford F-150 with his dad, spending weekends elbow-deep in grease and laughing when the engine backfired. That truck became his pride. He drove it to his first job, his first date, and eventually, to the construction sites where he'd spend his adulthood. Ask his coworkers about him, and they'll grin. Timothy was the guy who'd sneak a whoopee cushion onto your toolbox, who'd blast AC/DC at 7 a.m. to wake up the crew, who'd pack an extra sandwich in his lunchbox just in case someone forgot theirs. He wasn't just a hard worker, says his foreman. He was the glue, the guy who made 12-hour shifts feel like 10. After work, he'd head straight to the rink. Tuesday nights were sacred, his beer league hockey games. Timothy wasn't Gretzky. He'd trip over his own skates, lose teeth to errant pucks, and celebrate every goal like he'd won the Stanley Cup. His team called him Tornado Tim because he'd charge the net like a one-man wrecking ball. Win or lose, they'd end the night at Big Ed's Diner, where Timothy always ordered the same thing, burnt coffee and strawberry pie. Home was a cramped apartment above a laundromat. His sister helped him decorate, posters of muscle cars, a shelf for his hockey trophies, and a TV permanently tuned to action movies. He'd quote Predator while making spaghetti, forget to take out the trash, leave wet towels on the bathroom floor. In other words, he was normal, messy, alive, not a saint, not a hero, just a guy. But here's what the headlines got wrong. Timothy wasn't innocent because he lacked secrets or sins. He was innocent because he didn't deserve this, because he had a life that mattered. His mom still texts his old phone number every Christmas, just to say, I love you. His teammates retired his jersey number, #22, and hung it behind the bar at Big Ed's. His nephew, born 3 years after the murder, wears Timothy's old hockey gloves to every game. I never met him, the kid says, but I know he's got my back when I shoot. The family's kept his bedroom exactly as he left it, not as a shrine, but as a promise. His Xbox gathers dust next to a half-finished game of Guitar Hero. His work boots sit by the door, laces still tied in double knots. His bed's unmade, because Timothy never bothered to fix the sheets. We're not waiting for closure. His sister says, we're waiting for the day we can walk into this room and say, we did it. Tim, we got them. Until then, it stays, because this isn't a museum. It's evidence that he existed. The hardest part isn't the grief, it's the erasure. To the world, Timothy's a statistic, a cold case, a cautionary tale about being in the wrong place. But to his family, he's the smell of motor oil on flannel shirts, the sound of a hockey stick clattering against the boards, the goofy grin he'd flash when he lost at poker. People act like his story ended that night. His mom says, but we're still living it. Every day, every birthday, every time his niece asks why Uncle Tim isn't here to teach her how to drive. So let's be clear, this isn't a story about a victim. It's about a son who borrowed his dad's tools and never returned them. A friend who'd give you his last dollar if you needed gas. A man who loved bad puns, hated broccoli, and once got stuck in a tree trying to rescue a cat. A person who left behind 1,000 little holes in the lives he touched, not with a bullet, but with the ordinary, beautiful chaos of being human. Timothy's family doesn't want your pity. They don't want thoughts and prayers. They want you to know the real him, the man who lived, not the one who died. Because when we reduce tragedies to headlines, we don't just rob the dead of their dignity, we rob ourselves of the truth. That every innocent victim was someone's tornado, someone's glue, someone's unfinished game of Guitar Hero. So the next time you hear about a wrong place, wrong time story, don't look for the lesson. Don't settle for the cliché. Ask the harder questions. What made them laugh? What annoyed their siblings? What song did they sing in the shower? Timothy's answers matter, because if we forget them, the killer wins twice. Let's cut through the noise. The RCMP will tell you they've done everything by the book. They'll list the hours spent chasing tips, the forensic tests, the door-to-door canvassing. But 17 years later, here's the uncomfortable truth. This case isn't cold because the police failed. It's cold because the truth is buried under layers of silence, bad luck, and a question that gnaws at everyone who hears this story. Why Timothy? The theories start with the logical. Maybe it was a gang initiation, a new member ordered to prove loyalty by shooting the first stranger they saw. It's happened before in Vancouver, Toronto, cities where violence is part of the landscape. But Mission, in 2007, the closest gang activity was 50 kilometers away. No graffiti tags, no turf wars, just a quiet town where the biggest threat was frostbite. Then there's the wrong guy angle. Maybe Timothy looked like someone else, a drug dealer who owed money, a cheating boyfriend, a witness who saw too much. But detectives combed through his life and found nothing. No doppelgangers, no mistaken texts, no cryptic warnings. Just a construction worker who spent his weekends fixing up his truck and rewatching Die Hard. That leaves the third theory, the one no one wants to say out loud. What if there was no motive? What if Timothy was just there? A target chosen at random by someone who wanted to see what it felt like to pull a trigger, to take a life, to vanish into the night like a ghost. If that's true, then the scariest part isn't the crime. It's that the killer could be anyone. Your neighbor, your coworker, the guy who serves you coffee every morning, and they've been walking free for 17 years. The evidence, or lack of it, fuels the nightmare. No murder weapon, no DNA, no security cameras pointing at that intersection. Just a bullet hole and a timeline full of gaps. The shooter didn't leave a note, didn't brag to friends, didn't slip up and return to the scene. They're a shadow, and shadows don't leave fingerprints. The family's pushed for answers. They've begged for case reviews, hired private investigators, even consulted psychics. But psychics don't solve murders. Evidence does. And without it, the RCMP's hands are tied. Tips still trickle in, a deathbed confession in Alberta, a rumor about a stolen gun in Chilliwack, a Facebook post from someone claiming their cousin did it. But every lead unravels. The confession? A dementia patient's fantasy. The gun? Melted down years ago. The cousin? Serving time for a crime he didn't commit. The hardest part isn't the lack of clues. It's the lack of reason. Humans need narratives. We need to believe that if we connect A to B to C, the world makes sense. But Timothy's murder? It's a letter A floating in empty space. No B, no C, just a question mark that grows heavier every year. So where does that leave us? With a family that refuses to quit. Timothy's sister still posts his photo online every February 25th. His old hockey team hosts a charity tournament in his name. His mom leaves the porch light on, half expecting him to stumble in at midnight, laughing about how this whole thing was a misunderstanding. I know it's crazy, she says, but hope's the only thing they didn't take from us. The RCMP insists the case is still open, that all it takes is one phone call, one guilty conscience, one person tired of living with the weight of what they know. But in a town as small as Mission, silence speaks volumes, because if the killer's still here, if they've been shopping at the same grocery store, pumping gas at the same station, passing Timothy's memorial plaque every day, then someone knows. Maybe not the whole truth, but a sliver of it, a whisper, a rumor they're too scared to share. This isn't a Hollywood mystery. There's no twist, no hidden envelope with a killer's name, just a family's raw, unrelenting need to know why. Was it random? Was it personal? Was it an act of evil so pointless, so hollow, that even the killer can't explain it? We may never know. But here's what we do know. Stories like Timothy's don't end with a verdict or a headline. They end when we stop asking questions, when we stop saying his name, when we decide some truths are too uncomfortable to chase. So let's leave it here. Someone knows something. A secret buried under years of guilt or fear. A detail too small to matter, until it does. And if you're that someone, it's not too late to speak. Not for vengeance, not for closure, but for a mom who still texts her dead son's phone. A sister who still fights for his story. And a town that deserves to stop looking over its shoulder. We love endings. Killer caught. Motive revealed. Credits rolling to a bittersweet piano melody. But Timothy's story? It doesn't give us that. No courtroom drama. No tearful confession. Just a Facebook page frozen in 2009. Its last comment reading, "Any updates?" From a user who hasn't logged in since 2012. A mother who still memorizes the case number like it's her son's birthday. And a town that pretends it's moved on, but still flinches at the sound of sirens. This isn't the kind of case that gets a Netflix reboot or a podcast with millions of downloads. There's no twist, no smoking gun, just a family's stubborn refusal to let the world forget. To them, Timothy isn't a cold case. He's the lasagna left uneaten at Christmas dinner because nobody could take his seat. He's the empty spot on the bench at hockey games where his friends still yell, "Pass it to Tim." Out of habit, he's the silence that grows louder every year. But here's why this matters. Timothy's murder isn't just a failure of justice. It's a mirror. It forces us to ask, what do we owe the dead? When there's no villain to blame, no motive to dissect, do we just shrug and move on? Or do we sit with the discomfort of not knowing, of realizing that sometimes evil doesn't wear a mask, it doesn't monologue, it just pulls a trigger and walks away. The family's fought for 17 years to keep his name alive. They've printed t-shirts with his face, held candlelight vigils in the rain, even convinced the city to hang a plaque near the intersection where he died. But plaques fade, candles burn out, and the hardest truth of all, the world doesn't care about stories without endings. Not unless we make them. So let's talk about the elephant in the room, the unspoken question that hangs over this entire story. Why should you care? Timothy wasn't your brother, your friend, your son. But here's the thing, he could have been. Because the scariest part of wrong place, wrong time isn't the randomness. It's the realization that there's no recipe for safety, no list of rules to follow. You can be Timothy. Your neighbor can be Timothy. Any of us, at any moment, can become a headline that people scroll past on their way to cat videos and celebrity gossip. That's why silence is the real villain here. Not the shooter's silence, though that's unforgivable, but ours. The silence of a society that treats unsolved murders like math problems we can't crack. So we stop trying. The silence of friends who change the subject when Timothy's mom brings him up. The silence of a justice system that prioritizes solvable cases over lost causes. But the Jones family? They've turned silence into a weapon. Every year, on the anniversary, they stand at that intersection with posters of Timothy's face. Not the crime scene photo, the one where he's mid-laugh. Ketchup smeared on his chin from a burger at Big Ed's. They hand out flyers to drivers stuck at the red light. Most get tossed into cup holders. Forgotten. But some end up taped to fridge doors, stuffed into wallets, folded into the pockets of someone who knows exactly what happened that night. So where do we go from here? We sit with the unknown. We stop demanding tidy endings. And we remember that justice isn't just a verdict, it's the refusal to let indifference win. Timothy's story isn't about closure. It's about a mother who still memorizes his case number, a town that still hears the ghost of a gunshot, and a question that doesn't need an answer to matter. Would you stay silent for 17 years? Could you look his mom in the eye and say, "Sorry, I forgot"? Maybe the truth dies with the killer. Maybe it's buried in a landfill, rusting alongside that .40 caliber pistol. Or maybe, just maybe, it's in this room, on your screen, in your hands, because someone watching this knows exactly what happened on Horn Street. And it's not too late to speak. Not for fame, not for forgiveness, but for a simple, crushing reason. Timothy Vernon Jones was here. He mattered, and he deserves more than a plaque. So we'll end with the same question we started with, the one without an answer, the one that keeps this story alive. What would you do if a single gunshot stole not just a life, but the truth? For Timothy's family, the answer's simple. They'll keep asking, because as long as someone's listening, he's not gone. He's just waiting. So, what do you think happens next?